It's Monday, September 23rd, 2024, and we are 42 days away from the election. Welcome to today's Make It Make Sense mini episode. I'm Grant Herms. On the show today, it looks like Congress might have just found a way to avoid a government shutdown. So, a few days ago, last Thursday, I talked about how Republicans had rejected their own plan, along with almost every single Democrat as well, to fund the government. Now, Republicans didn't like the funding plan because it wasn't a full budget, and many of them wanted a bill that would require citizens to prove that you're a citizen when you go to register to vote, which is known as the SAVE Act. Now, I'm not going to go through all that again. If you want to know more about that, you can listen to Thursday's mini episode. There's also an episode from 2 weeks ago in which I really broke that down. But the gist is the bill is being pushed by Republicans who want it for the idea of election security, but really it's a solution in search of a problem, or rather a solution to something that Republicans see as a problem. Well, yesterday afternoon, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson announced that the House would be voting on a new continuing resolution that would fund the government until December 20th. That didn't include the SAVE Act, and the original plan was to fund the government until March. So he sent a letter to members of his own party saying they had to do it this way to avoid the Senate from packing its returning funding bill with things that Republicans don't want, making the process even longer. He means to say that the Senate, when they get the House version of any kind of budget bill, the Senate gets to come back with their bill, and then they fight about it until they reach some sort of compromise. But in this letter, Johnson wrote, quote, "While this is not the solution any of us prefer, it is the most prudent path forward under the present circumstances. As history has taught and current polling affirms, shutting the government down less than 40 days from a fateful election would be an act of political malpractice." Now, the reason I point that out is because he felt the need to include that to convince members that shutting the government down would be a bad thing, likely because Donald Trump has twice publicly called on Republicans to shut down the government if they couldn't pass, quote, every ounce of the SAVE Act. And there are a few things to talk about when it comes to this continuing resolution, or CR. First, we don't really know what's in it yet other than how Johnson described it as being very, very narrow and bare bones. We do know that the idea is to fund the government at its current budget, which usually means less than what agencies have been asking for in a new budget because of things like inflation or just the rise in need for more funding. But it also includes about $232 million for the Secret Service to increase protections on presidential candidates and presidents, obviously driven by the two attempts on Trump's life this cycle. It also provides some new money for FEMA to react faster to disasters and give aid faster. Now, Democratic leadership in both the House and the Senate say they'll be taking this up today just because they got back into Washington for the weekend. The Senate will need to make a bipartisan deal, which isn't also a given. And remember, the shutdown is in just a week, just 7 days away. And while I'm talking about things that we don't know how Republican members are going to vote. Now, usually, leaders don't bring something to the floor unless they know they have the vote. Otherwise, they risk a pretty embarrassing airing of, inter-party dirty laundry. It looks bad for the party, and it's also just a big waste of time. And Johnson will likely need to get Democratic support, which will be unpopular with a lot of Republican members and could back Johnson into being forced to make concessions with Democrats. And the last time one of those things happened, Republicans bucked their leader, Kevin McCarthy, and removed him from his speakership for working across the aisle, among a few other things. And so it's really unclear what Republicans are going to do, given that this new plan to fund the government is the direct opposite of what Trump wanted, especially in an election year, not to mention what Trump is going to do. And as I'm recording this, he still hasn't said anything about it yet. Now, he might not say anything because it was the worry of members of both parties who didn't want to kick this can down the road until March for a new president to inherit what would be a pretty nasty budget fight at the very start of a president's term. And Trump might understand that in some sense. He's also pretty focused on just getting elected president at this point, and that might be a distant thought for him other than what he's said previously. Now, like I said before, this current plan would extend the government funding until December 20th. So the idea is that Congress would have some time to both get through the election and have this thing done before they left for the holidays at the end of the year. That was the same thing that happened in 2018 and 2019 in that shutdown, so that stretched across the new year, and the specter of not wanting that to happen again is likely also an incentive to get this thing passed. So what happens next year? Well, the Rules Committee is meeting today to make sure that this thing was done by the book and all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And then a full vote is expected in the House on Wednesday if that passes. If that passes, then it goes to the Senate, where Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said he was confident it would pass before the end of the week, so before the deadline. But in this political year, it really seems like anything could happen, so we will just have to wait and see. And that is it for today's Mims Mini. Thank you so much for listening. Please rate and review this episode of this podcast if you haven't done that already. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Also subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got the full extended interview from last week's full episode up right now. That's with Dr. Brian Hughes from American University, all about political violence in this current climate. It's a really, really interesting conversation. You can also share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.